Alright, so this is going to be a bit of a doozy, a bit of a complicated video if you know anything about the subject, but I'm going to show you William Lane Craig completely dismantling Ben Shapiro on the topic of Jesus. And Ben Shapiro is going to completely quit the debate at the end. Okay, it's going to be fun. You're going to learn a lot if you don't currently know a lot about the subject. Let's get right into it. And this is for all you people like, Ben Shapiro is the greatest debater of all time. Ben Shapiro, Ben Shapiro. Like how I used to be. This guy's a hack. This guy's a fraud.
So let's
Benaside Shapiro, Benny Boy.
So what is the proof that Jesus was who he says he is in the Gospels?
Well, first we need to establish who he thought he was. When you look at the religio-historical context of the life and ministry of Jesus, I think you can show that among the historically authentic words of Jesus were claims that he thought he was the Jewish Messiah, that he believed himself to be the Son of God in a unique sense that set him apart from Jewish kings and prophets, and finally, that he thought that he was the Son of Man predicted by the prophet Daniel, to whom God would give all dominion, power, and authority. So he had this radical self-understanding of being Messiah, Son of God, and the Son of Man. And at the trial scene before the Sanhedrin in Mark 15, all three of these titles come to a head when the high priest asks him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One, that is the Son of God?" And Jesus says, "I am." And then virtually quoting from Daniel, "And you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven and seated at the right hand of the power." And at that point, the high priest rips his robes and says, "You have heard the blasphemy. What more witnesses do we need?" And Mark says they all condemned him.
Now, it's important. I would also add that the I am statement's more than just saying, "Yeah, I'm the Messiah." It's a quote. It's a reference to Exodus when God called himself "I am," and Jesus, on a prior occasion, if you read the Gospels, I forgot exactly where it was. He said, "Before Abraham, I am," and the Pharisees went to go stone him because that was clearly blasphemy. Jesus was clearly claiming to be God. I wish he would have added that, but this alone is enough to get the point across. And you can hear Ben Shapiro's response.
As worthy of death. And that enabled them, since they didn't have the ability to carry out capital punishment, to deliver him over to the Roman authorities by slandering him as a pretender to be king of the Jews, and therefore a political figure who could be tried for treason and sedition and crucified.
So from the Jewish perspective, this narrative has some holes in sort of Jewish philosophy. The narrative begins with the idea that Jesus appears in front of the Sanhedrin and then claims to be the Messiah. Well, there's nothing actual criminally in any of the tractates that say that if...
So he clearly misses the point here. Craig just made the point that he didn't merely just claim to be Messiah. He claimed to be much more, and he's obviously going to respond with that. Let's keep going.
Declare yourself the Messiah. This is actually a punishable offense, even. That there are many Jews, including Bar Kokhba, who have declared themselves messianic figures.
Absolutely.
The real gap here is that in the Gospels, Jesus' vision of himself as the Messiah is completely different from the prior vision of what the Jewish Messiah is, and is actually outside the scope of how Jews describe the Messiah, or really have ever described the Messiah. The Messiah in Judaism has always been a political figure who is destined to do certain things, restoring the kingdom of Israel.
Yeah, exactly, and that's one of the things that got him crucified, and that's one of the reasons why, or one of the speculated reasons why Judas betrayed Jesus, because at a certain point, Judas kind of realized, this guy isn't going to overtake Rome. Why am I following him? But I would also make the point, it is true that the people of Jesus' time, the people surrounding him, didn't really understand the Messiah to be what Jesus was claiming the Messiah to be. But that doesn't mean it was completely out of left field in the sense that there was no sign of this. There's Isaiah 53, which is basically a verbatim prophecy of Jesus' life. You have Psalm 22. And you also had the sympathetic Pharisees, for example, Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus. All right? And these two, and considering, I would say Nicodemus explicitly came to believe, Joseph of Arimathea, it's assumed, given his honorable burial he gave Jesus. And he's also canonized as a saint. So I think on good grounds you can say both of them converted. I think both of them realized, this was actually the Messiah that was prophesied, right? So it is true that the people surrounding Jesus didn't really understand the Messiah to be what Jesus was claiming the Messiah to be, but it doesn't mean it was completely, made out of thin air, so to speak. There was clear signs of it in the past.
Maintain
and even some rabbis were saying, like, Isaiah 53 was a prophecy of the Messiah before Jesus.
Things are considered sort of political things that the Messiah does, but the idea of the Messiah as embodiment of God is something that's foreign to Jewish religious philosophy going all the way back to the beginning. So even the idea that the Sanhedrin would be questioning him in those terms and would get from that what he means is, I am God, which would be a much more punishable offense, presumably that'd be actual blasphemy. It's an oddity.
I think you're absolutely right.
Well, like I said earlier, I mean, the Pharisees, Jesus literally said, before Abraham, I am. Then these Pharisees went to go stone him because they knew that he was claiming to be God.
In saying that Jesus' understanding of the Messiah was radically different from the prevailing cultural understanding of the Messiah among the chief priests and the common people. And he didn't meet their expectations. Indeed, that's what helped to get him crucified. Being the Messiah, you're right, in and of itself isn't a blasphemous claim. But to claim to be the Son of God in a unique sense,
and also claiming to be able to forgive sins.
Son of Man prophesied by Daniel, sitting at the right hand of the power, that is truly blasphemous and is sufficient for his condemnation. Now, the question, I think, that is raised by your...
And I'm a bit confused by Ben's objection, actually, because I just thought about it. Is he saying that the Sanhedrin didn't condemn him for blasphemy? The Sanhedrin clearly understood it to be blasphemy, so what exactly is the point he's making? Is he just making the point that he didn't live up to original Messiah, or his understanding, or the common Jewish understanding of the Jewish Messiah? Was that just his point? If so, I mean, I think we're going to get into it, but I would assume he would understand the resurrection is the whole point.
Interpretation, yes.
Yeah, your interpretation, Ben, is this. Why should we believe Jesus' reinterpretation of the Messiah rather than the one that the chief priests and the people held? And I think the answer to that is his resurrection from the dead. Jesus' resurrection from the dead is Yahweh's public and unequivocal vindication of the man whom the chief priests had rejected as a blasphemer. It is the divine demonstration that these allegedly blasphemous claims are in fact true, that he was who he claimed to be, and that therefore I follow Jesus in his conception of what it means to be the Messiah.
So when it comes to the resurrection, why is resurrection proof of divinity? So Lazarus is resurrected.
So that's a pretty dumb question. It was raised as a question, not an objection, so I'm not going to get on him too much for that. But obviously Lazarus' case is different. He's going to make the point here of how it's different.
That's why I wanted to emphasize the religio-historical context before we talked about the resurrection. A miracle taken in isolation is inherently ambiguous. The proper interpretation of a miracle is going to be given by the religio-historical context in which it occurs. And the resurrection of Jesus is not just the resurrection of any old body. It's the resurrection of the man who claimed to be Messiah, Son of God, and Son of Man, and who was crucified for those allegedly blasphemous claims. If God has raised this man from the dead, then he has...
Right, and also cursed by hung to a tree.
...vindicated those allegedly blasphemous claims.
So one of the counterclaims to some of this is that the Gospels are written significantly after Jesus lives. Even the earliest Gospel is written, 70 CE? Somewhere 40 years after Jesus is crucified. So what's to say, that...
It's very interesting how Ben doesn't know that 40 years, given the time period, is actually very early. If anything, the 40-year dating is very strong evidence is supportive because of how early it is. And of course, Craig's going to go into later about the 1 Corinthians 15 creed, the stuff that dates within 5 years of the crucifixion. Given the time period, that is extraordinarily early. Extraordinarily early. I mean, look at other sources, look at other events attested to from this time period or earlier, even a little bit after. You have writings from like hundreds, 200, 300, 400, 500 years after, and they're considered reliable sources. So 40 years is not a knock at all.
Like most historical events,
It's just an ignorant
there
point.
is some play in the joints here. So that this would be the historical argument against the exact veracity of the gospel revelation.
Very weak argument.
Now, I think it's important to understand, Ben, that in order for a historical document to be reliable.
And also, let's do a body language comparison, okay? We have William Lane Craig. Legs are taking space. He's taking up space like a man. And you have Ben Shapiro. Okay, I wish you could see my legs. I'm putting them together like a female. And he's just like... See, does Ben have that? Probably not. But he's just like this. My shoulder. My shoulder is the size of Ben's head. Boy. William Lane Craig is mogging Ben Shapiro.
It isn't required that it be inerrant.
Contemporaneous, of course.
So,
of course.
What I would argue
Can't get over that.
that underlying the inference to the resurrection of Jesus are three great independently established facts.
All right, here we go with the minimal facts argument. If you don't know this, you need to learn.
The historical evidence, and which surprisingly, I did my doctoral work on this in Germany, are recognized as such by the majority of New Testament scholars today who studied the historical Jesus. And these facts would be that after his crucifixion and burial by a member of the Sanhedrin named Joseph of Arimathea, that Jesus' tomb was discovered empty on the first day of the week by a group of his female followers. Secondly would be that various individuals and groups of people then witnessed appearances of Jesus alive. And finally, number three would be that the original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that God had raised Jesus from the dead, despite having every predisposition to the contrary. The vast majority of scholars have come to accept as convincing the evidence in support of those three facts, not assuming biblical inerrancy or inspiration, but treating the Gospels as ordinary historical documents. You can show, for example, that the fact of the discovery of the empty tomb is attested by at least 6 independent sources in the New Testament, some of which are extraordinarily early. No scholar denies that individuals and groups saw postmortem appearances of Jesus. The only question is whether you should or could dismiss them as hallucinatory. And again, nobody denies that the original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that God had raised Jesus from the dead. So these three facts are pretty firmly established, and the only question is then how do you best explain them? And down through history,
so Craig makes his
to
arguments.
explain these facts without
This is the meat and potatoes of discussion, or should have been the meat and potatoes discussion.
Conspiracy theory, the
See what's about to
apparent
happen.
death theory, the hallucination
And remember, Ben
theory,
started
and
this
so
by
forth.
saying, "Oh,
And
you know,
I would argue
what's the argument here?"
that none of these naturalistic
Remember that.
theories
See what Ben's about to say.
meets the criteria for being the best historical explanation of the facts.
Give me your
None of
money.
them is as good an
Killed all the kids in
explanation as the
Gaza.
one that the original disciples gave.
Better give us
God raised
nukes, or
Jesus
we're
from the
gonna,
dead.
or you better
And
give us
if
bombs
that's
and
right,
war work, or
then
we're
I
gonna
think we
nuke
have good
Gaza.
grounds
We're
to
gonna
be
start
almost
nuclear war.
compelled
Yeah.
to revise our typical understanding of who the Messiah was supposed to be.
So we can have the historical argument back and forth, obviously, and I think that there are arguments that you can make. I think there are arguments that I can make, but I honestly find them relatively uninteresting, is the truth.
Right. So let's break this down. Ben Shapiro invites the greatest Christian debater of all time by accolades, and then he starts a discussion. Remember, let's go back. go back. Let's make sure let's go back to
For
what
the
he said.
God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth exists.
Okay, so let's get into that.
Okay.
So what is the proof that Jesus was who he says he is?
He started this. Okay, what is the proof? And then
I would argue that God's supposed to.
Arguments that you can make. I think there are arguments that I can make, but I honestly find them relatively uninteresting. Is the truth? Simply because
kill the kids in Gaza, kill the kids in Gaza, kill the kids in Gaza, kill the kids in Gaza.
Argument, for example, I think it's
so he completely flunks out. Okay, he completely backs out of the debate essentially at this point. And then this is weaseling. Okay, this is when I say Ben Shapiro isn't actually that good of a debater because he weasels here. All right, and this is the most important thing. Okay, Ben Shapiro's gone around. Remember, he brings William Lane Craig onto his podcast. Okay, and he does this. Of course, on other occasions, he said the Sanhedrin condemning Jesus was a good thing. Okay, Ben Shapiro's done all of this stuff. And Ben weasels by saying, well, I can make arguments, you can make arguments, but I don't really find it that interesting. And then he himself makes an argument right after. Which
it's fairly easy to claim there's a sect of Judaism right now in which there's a small subsection of people who believe that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is still alive. Right, the Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away in the 1990s,
yes.
And there's still people who treat him as though
Ben Shapiro just made an atheistic argument.
The Messiah.
Like
think that he was the political Messiah.
One of the dumb arguments atheists make.
Do that 20 years after his death. You know, that's not proof to me that he is actually alive. Some of them claim.
That's completely straw man. See, he says, oh, well, historical arguments are interesting. Then he goes to talk about some other guy and says, well, just because people said he did doesn't mean, I believe it. But that's a very reductionist way of looking at it. Okay, he basically pushed away the argument, and then he made an objection to it. This is weaseling. This is how you debate like a complete weasel. All right, and Ben Shapiro's supposed to be like, oh, I'm a really good debater. Oh, look at his hands. Look at his hands. Give us money so we could kill the kids in Gaza. Please. Like, I look too handsome, I look too dominant in order to be like Ben Shapiro. I gotta change my whole entire look in order to actually impersonate. Like, maybe if I do it from the side, you can see my nerd neck better. Like, give us money to kill the kids in Gaza, please. Anyways, when I say he makes an atheist type of argument, a lot of atheists say, well, there's 4,000 religions, 4,000 gods created by man, or whatever number. How do you know yours is right? How can you say yours is right? And then you start making an argument for it, like, well, the Muslims say Muhammad is this or that, and that's why your argument is wrong. Complete non sequitur. It's a really stupid argument. Really stupid rebuttal.
Right. So, especially when you're talking about events 2,000 years ago, if people write that down, I think there's sufficient.
I doubt this man's tomb is empty.
I mean, I haven't dug him up, so I wouldn't know. But the claims, if somebody claimed 2,000 years from now that his tomb was empty, or claimed 70 years from now that his tomb was empty, then
that's an important difference, Ben. The important time gap is not the gap between the events and the present. Good evidence doesn't become bad evidence just because of the lapse of time. The critical event, as you just said, is the time gap between the events and the recording of those events. And in the case of the events of the life of Jesus and his resurrection, that time gap is extraordinarily narrow. We can push back even before the writing of the Gospels and the epistles of Paul by discerning the traditions upon which they relied when they wrote. And some of these go back to within, it's estimated, 5 years after Jesus crucifixion.
No, so this is a pretty good example of goodbye language. He doesn't start to say, He's very articulate. He's very charismatic. He uses his hands very well. This is a very good example. And meanwhile, Ben is like, kill the kids in Gaza. I used to be such a big Ben Shapiro fan, but these guys clearly, liking Ben Shapiro is a phase. Eventually, if you're actually a G, you're actually smart, you're going to get out of it. Don't worry.
I'm thinking of the ones that Paul transmits to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians 15. So
don't forget to subscribe. All right, that's for my channel. All right, don't forget to subscribe. All right. I'll put the I appreciate this guy for clipping this up. So I'll put his channel name in the description. Hopefully I don't forget. Anyways, Christian men need to become more knowledgeable. Christian men need to stop being fanboys of Ben Shapiro. Don't be a fanboy of someone just because they say, well, abortion's wrong. Obviously, everyone knows that. Or everyone should innately understand that. But, you know, people are brainwashed into not. Want to join the movement Building Back Christian Men? Join the link in the description to the Discord. Follow me on Instagram to see all of my amazing posts. Check the playlist in the description to change your life. Subscribe for more amazing videos. I already said that, but I'm going to say it again because how important it is. Nothing is more important than that. Those are my call to actions. See you next video.